Varginha is a small town deep in the interior of Brazil. Not a scientific center, not a military base, not a place where one would expect events capable of shaking humanity's understanding of reality. It is an ordinary town, so ordinary that it is almost invisible on the world map. Narrow streets, low houses, cafes opening early in the morning. People who know one another, living to the slow rhythm of the South American countryside. Here, the biggest news is usually a football match, a local festival, or an unusual change in the weather. No one in Varginha grew up thinking their town would one day be mentioned in the same sentence as names like Roswell or Rendlesham, and no one imagined it would become one of the most controversial cases in modern UFO history. January 1996, summer in Brazil. The air was hot, heavy, humid. Nights were usually quiet, filled only with the sound of insects and the dim glow of streetlights reflecting off the pavement. It was a night with no sign of disaster, no warning, no omen. No one looked up at the sky feeling that history was about to turn in a different direction. Yet it is often in places like this, the most ordinary places, that the most inexplicable events occur. It began with a sound, not thunder, not the familiar noise of an aircraft, but something strange, low, drawn out, reverberating, awakening many people at the same time without them understanding why. Some described it as metal, scraping through the air. Others said it was an uneven, piercing hiss, as if the sky itself were malfunctioning. Then came the lights. In the night sky over Varginha, multiple independent witnesses saw points of light moving in ways unlike any aircraft they had ever known. Not in straight lines, not along stable trajectories. They changed direction abruptly, accelerated, then stopped, seemingly unbound by inertia. There was no jet engine noise, no aviation signal, no immediate explanation. Some lights vanished in an instant, others plunged lower, dropping below the rooftops. And then something fell. Not a massive explosion, not a pillar of fire like in the movies, but a heavy impact distant on the outskirts of town, enough to draw attention, but not clear enough to identify what it was. By the next morning, rumors spread faster than any official information. Some said they saw smoke. Some said they heard a loud crash near the forest. Others claimed a strange object had fallen near a farm. But in those first hours, there was no press, no government announcement, no explanation. Only scattered fragments passed from house to house in a town unaccustomed to mystery. What stood out was not only what people saw, but what the night left behind. The atmosphere in Varginha changed. Residents described an unease that was hard to name. Not outright fear, but the sense that something had happened, and they were not allowed to know what it was. Children struggled to sleep. Adults gathered to speak in hushed voices. Some avoided looking toward the area where the object was said to have fallen. And while the town woke the next morning as usual, going to work, opening shops, taking children to school, something had changed forever. The belief that the world around them was fully predictable. It is important to emphasize this. This is not a fairy tale, not an anonymous rumor with no origin, not a legend woven over generations. This was a specific night, January 1996, in Varginha, Brazil. There were living witnesses, a defined time, a chain of events, and that is what makes this case unsettling. Because if it were imagination, it would have faded with time. If it were a misunderstanding, it would have been clearly explained. Instead, Varginha became a name whispered. Like a crack in the ordered picture of the world. An ordinary night, an ordinary town, and a question that has hung in the air for nearly 3 decades. What really fell over Varginha that night? That afternoon, Varginha was still. Varginha. No sirens, no soldiers on the streets, no sense that anything extraordinary was approaching. 3 young girls were walking across a vacant lot on the outskirts of town, a normal habit, as familiar as the road beneath their feet. They were not hunting UFOs, not seeking mystery. They were simply on their way home. Then they saw it. At first, their minds refused to process what was in front of them because the thing crouched near the wall did not fit into any familiar category. Not human, not animal, not anything they had ever seen. A small creature, thin-bodied, curled inward as if injured or exhausted. Its skin was dark, with a texture unlike human skin or that of any animal. Its head was disproportionately large, with big bulging red eyes that reflected light in a way that triggered an immediate survival instinct. But what stayed with them most was not its appearance. It was the smell. A strong, nauseating odor, metallic mixed with sulfur. Not the smell of decay, not the smell of an animal. A scent that made the stomach tighten, the body react before reason could intervene. They did not stay long. They ran, not out of curiosity, not out of excitement, but out of primal fear, the kind that arises when humans confront something that should not exist in their familiar world. Later, when questioned, their accounts lacked sensationalism, no exaggeration, no cinematic language, no dramatic embellishment. Instead, fragmented, hesitant, sometimes slightly inconsistent, the hallmarks of testimony from people who have experienced psychological shock. They did not say, "We saw aliens." They said, "We don't know what it was." That difference is crucial. Those who fabricate stories tend to fill gaps with conclusions. Those who truly witness the unexplainable can only describe and leave the question open. One of them suffered severe shock. Another experienced prolonged nightmares. Families confirmed behavioral changes, anxiety, withdrawal. There was no search for fame, no financial gain, only fear and the wish that it had never happened. If the story had ended with 3 girls, it might have been dismissed as a misunderstanding or collective hallucination, but it did not end there. In the days that followed, other accounts emerged, independent, fragmented, yet disturbingly consistent. One man claimed he saw a strange creature being chased near a forested area. Another reported unusual military presence, unannounced. Some medical staff said they treated patients with strange symptoms, only for the records to later disappear. None of these people knew each other well enough to coordinate a single narrative. There was no secret meeting, no shared script, and this lack of perfection, the misaligned pieces, is precisely what makes the story more credible. This seemingly simple question is where every explanation collapses. If it was human, why did its appearance, smell, and the witness's reactions not align? If it was an animal, why could no one identify it, even those familiar with local wildlife? If it was a hoax, why did the military intervene afterward? No hypothesis fully holds. And more importantly, no official explanation was offered immediately, as authorities usually do to reassure the public. Instead, there was silence, an information vacuum, often present when there is no agreed-upon story to tell. One point that skeptics and believers alike must acknowledge: if nothing happened, the subsequent reaction, from both authorities and the town, was excessive. Witnesses were not invited to speak publicly. They were told to remain silent. The press faced obstacles, and the story began to distort over time. In ordinary misunderstandings, clarity increases. In cover-ups, clarity dissolves. Varginha belongs to the latter, not because of the idea of extraterrestrials, but because of the possibility that something did happen, and we were not meant to know the whole truth, because if a strange being could appear in daylight in a small town, seen by civilians, and then vanish from all official records, then the question is no longer, are we alone in the universe? But how much do we really know about the world we live in? If the story had ended with civilian testimony, it might have been filed away as an unexplained phenomenon. But Varginha did not end there. Shortly after reports of the creature, the military appeared. Not local police, not civilian emergency services, but military units, unmarked vehicles moving quickly, discreetly, without any public announcement. Streets were temporarily sealed. Some outskirts were restricted. Residents were told to stay indoors. No official explanation, no press release, no convincing reason for military presence in a town with no strategic value. And this is where many began to question. If nothing happened, why a military response? Multiple independent witnesses described military trucks moving at night, slowly, escorted toward areas where the creature had been reported. Some trucks were said to carry sealed metal containers. Others appeared equipped for transporting something requiring isolation. Notably, these vehicles did not match any announced training operation. No drills, no prior notice, no transparent administrative record. To locals, this was unfamiliar and frightening, because the military does not appear unless there is a serious threat or a situation beyond civilian control. In the days that followed, rumors converged on a single point. The military was not there to observe, they were there to retrieve. Some witnesses claimed to have seen a strange creature, restrained by soldiers, matching the girls' descriptions: small, weak, neither human nor local animal. According to these accounts, the being was loaded onto a military vehicle and transported away that same night. No public images, no official confirmation, only fragmented testimonies, repeating the same core details. And repetition makes dismissal difficult. If fabricated, it would require an extraordinary level of coordination and long-term silence, rare in a small community where rumors spread fast and distort easily. Instead of exploding, the story was compressed. Soon after, another piece of information leaked, this time from a hospital. Some medical staff claimed they treated military personnel with unusual symptoms: high fever, rapid deterioration, unexplained inflammatory responses. One case drew particular attention. A soldier allegedly had direct contact with the creature during its capture. He later died. There was no official statement on the cause of death. No full medical record released. No satisfactory explanation given to the family. Over time, details faded, not because people forgot, but because documentation vanished. What haunts the case is not a single death, but a pattern of anomalies. Some witnesses connected to the incident reportedly died in later years under unclear circumstances. There is no direct proof of a link, but also no transparency sufficient to rule it out. In cases where nothing is hidden, transparency is usually the fastest way to end controversy. In Varginha, transparency never came. Over time, official responses became strangely consistent. Denial, delay, minimization. No UFO, no creature, no unusual military activity, yet at the same time. Witnesses were silenced, press access was restricted, records disappeared or remained incomplete. This contradiction is what independent investigators cannot ignore. Because in science and investigation, absence of evidence is not always evidence of absence, especially when there are signs that evidence once existed. At this stage, the key question is no longer, was the creature extraterrestrial? But why did the military respond as if to a real threat? Why were there casualties without explanation? Why did a small town become the focus of information control? If it was all a misunderstanding, the response was excessive. If something did occur, the prolonged silence was deliberate. And in the gap between those two possibilities, real unease begins. From the moment the military intervened, Varginha stopped being a witness story. It became a story about power, about who defines truth, and about what can be buried when it threatens the familiar order. Because when the military steps in, and when people die, no matter how the story ends, it has crossed the line of mere rumor. When media and public pressure grew, an official response finally emerged, brief, vague, unsupported by evidence. A message so familiar it felt scripted. There were no aliens, no UFOs, no threat to national security. According to this version, everything in Varginha was a collective misunderstanding. Rumor, imagination, and local media exaggeration. But the problem was not the denial, it was how it was delivered. The creature, authorities claimed, was merely a homeless man, dirty, ill, panicked, hiding in the outskirts. At first glance, this might sound plausible, but placed beside independent testimonies, the holes appear immediately. What homeless person has a naturally dark, oily skin, large, red, unblinking eyes, makes no recognizable human sounds, triggers extreme fear in animals? There were no medical records, no confirmed identity, no one to verify that this person existed. A simple explanation without foundation. If it were truly a homeless man, the military response becomes absurd. Why? Unmarked military vehicles, area lockdowns, nighttime sealed transport, non-civilian units, ordinary social or medical crises follow clear protocols, police, healthcare, social services. In Varginha, the order was reversed. The military came first. Information came later. Explanation came last and did not align. Such a response only makes sense if there was an unidentified threat, a biological hazard, or something that could not be made public. Not when dealing with one individual. Notably, official statements ignored specific witness details. Lights in the sky before the fall. Metallic sounds, environmental anomalies, consistent creature descriptions from independent sources. Everything was lumped into a vague concept, mass hysteria. But mass hysteria rarely produces such consistent, sensory-rich descriptions, shape, smell, behavior, instinctive fear, and it rarely coincides with unexplained military operations. Another factor preventing closure is missing documentation. Reports believed to have existed. Internal military files, medical records, witness interviews. Yet journalists and researchers encountered the same replies. Not found. Not in the system. Access denied. There is no sign the documents never existed, only that they are no longer allowed to exist. And in any serious investigation, disappearing records raise more suspicion than their contents ever could. Ironically, the more authorities deny, the more persistent the story becomes. not because of blind belief in aliens, but because reasonable questions remain unanswered. The people of Varginha are not asking for extraterrestrial confirmation. They want to know what really happened that night. Why was the response so extreme? Why were they told to forget what they witnessed? When official answers fail, information gaps become fertile ground for doubt. One of the clearest signs of a cover-up lies not in what is said, but in broken logic. If nothing happened, no lockdown was needed, no military was required, no decades-long silence was necessary. Ordinary events are handled with transparency, extraordinary ones with control. Varginha was handled the second way. To this day, no definitive evidence has been released to close the Varginha case, but no explanation solid enough has replaced it. Between those two voids, the truth hangs suspended, unconfirmed but not buried. And perhaps that is the safest state for a truth not meant to be spoken. Because in a world where power can shape collective memory, the most frightening thing is not extraterrestrials. It is never knowing what has been hidden from us. If Varginha were merely a strange local tale, it might have faded as folklore or mass confusion. But when researchers place Varginha in a global context, a troubling pattern emerges. What happened there has happened elsewhere, not identically, but structurally. In global UFO records, several major cases share key features: unidentified aerial phenomena, reports of non-human beings, rapid military intervention, official denial, records that fade or vanish. Varginha is not an anomaly, it fits the model. In 1947, Roswell began with a crash, followed by military lockdown and material recovery, then a rapid shift from flying disc to weather balloon. In Canada, the 1967 Falcon Lake incident involved direct contact, physical injury, and restricted military reports. In Zimbabwe, the 1994 Ariel school case involved dozens of children reporting non-human beings, with strikingly consistent testimony. And in Brazil, there is Varginha, not because of aliens, but because the truth is handled the same way everywhere. What makes Varginha particularly significant is not the creature, but the state's response. Across major cases, military responses exceed necessity. Information is tightly controlled, media is guided, witnesses are discredited or silenced. If these were random misunderstandings, it is hard to explain why governments with different cultures and systems respond with the same pattern, unless they are responding to the same phenomenon. Brazil is rarely central in global UFO discussions dominated by the US and Europe, but internal files and military testimony suggest otherwise. Brazil has vast airspace, dense forests difficult to monitor, a long history of UFO reports, especially in Minas Gerais, and the Amazon. Varginha is not unique. It is simply the most visible. Many researchers believe it was not a rare accident, but a failure of concealment. In global UFO research, the controversial concept of crash retrieval, the recovery of non-human technology or beings, persists. Varginha is often placed in this category, not because of public proof, but because it includes creature descriptions, military transport, isolation measures, casualties. These elements rarely appear together in mundane misunderstandings. Unlike many cases, Varginha involved civilian witnesses, not soldiers or scientists. 3 young girls, local residents, people with no political or scientific agenda. They spoke not in technical terms, but in fear, and fear is difficult to fabricate. Today, governments shift language from UFO to UAP, more neutral, admitting unknown, not admitting origin. If Varginha happened today, it might be labeled a UAP incident with unidentified biological elements. But the core issue remains unchanged. There are phenomena governments admit they do not understand, but still do not fully disclose. Varginha is not final proof, but it is an unremovable piece, not because it proves something conclusively, but because it asks the same question posed by dozens of other cases. If nothing happened, why did those in power act as if something very serious had occurred? And if something did happen, how many other cases were successfully buried? Varginha does not stand alone. It stands within a network of unresolved stories, spanning decades, nations, and generations of witnesses. Placed within that network, it ceases to be local. It becomes global. Now set skepticism aside. Do not believe, do not dismiss. Just assume, for a brief moment, that Varginha was real. Not in a sensational sense. No motherships, no invasion. Simply that, on one specific night in 1996, in a real town, humans encountered something not belonging to their familiar world. Immediately, the foundations humanity uses to understand itself begin to tremble. For thousands of years, religion or science, humans placed themselves at the center. We believed Earth was the center of the universe. Humans were chosen. Our intelligence was the peak of evolution. Even when modern science humbled us, a small planet in a vast cosmos, we still believed we were the only known intelligence. If Varginha was real, that belief collapses, quietly, without drama, just a cold truth. We are not special, and perhaps never were. For decades, humanity has asked, if the universe is so vast, why do we see no one else? The Fermi paradox. But if Varginha was real, perhaps the question should be reversed. Not where are they, but why don't they let us see them? Cosmic silence may not be emptiness, it may be deliberate. And Varginha, in that case, was not a greeting, but a small error in a perfect system of control. If a non-Earth being appeared, was quickly retrieved, concealed, erased, then comes the next question. Was this the first time, or just the first time we noticed? Both possibilities are terrifying. If it was the first, we are unprepared. If not, our history has been observed for a long time. Protection or surveillance? We do not know, and that uncertainty is the most disturbing part. If Varginha was real, it is not about extraterrestrials. It is about us, about who is allowed to know the truth, who decides what is too dangerous for the public, whether humanity is as mature as it believes. Perhaps governments believe they are protecting society from panic. Perhaps they fear the collapse of religious, political, philosophical systems. But if the truth about our place in the universe exists, hiding it does not make humanity stronger. It keeps us children. Perhaps the real reason such truth is buried, if it dagodai when it exists, is that we are not ready to abandon the idea of centrality, accept multiple levels of intelligence, revisit history without placing humans at the top. A civilization still fighting over belief, skin color, borders, ideology. In that context, knowing we are not alone might not enlighten us. It might expose our immaturity. And paradoxically, if Varginha was real, it may also be humanity's greatest opportunity. Not technological, not political, but an opportunity to redefine who we are, place humanity within a larger picture. Think as a global civilization for the first time. Knowing we are not alone could render internal conflicts meaningless. Ultimately, the most important question Varginha raises is not, Do aliens exist? But if they do, how would we respond? Would we continue to deny? Or would we learn to face the truth, even if it is uncomfortable? The universe does not care about our feelings. It does not adjust truth to fit belief. Only we do. Varginha may never be officially confirmed. There may be no final document, no confession, no irrefutable proof. That does not make the story meaningless, because its value lies not in whether it is true, but in how much it would force us to change our view of the world if it were. And sometimes, the most important stories are not meant to be believed, but to force us to re-examine questions we thought were already answered. If Varginha was real, humanity did not see extraterrestrials. We saw our own limits, limits in how we understand reality, limits in our ability to accept truth, limits in the maturity of a civilization barely out of the cosmic cradle. And perhaps the most frightening thing is not that we are not alone. It is whether, when the truth knocks, we will dare to open the door. If you find these questions worth contemplating, subscribe to the channel to explore the mysteries humanity continues to avoid. Each video is a journey into the darker edges of knowledge, where truth is not always comfortable, but always worth confronting.